Welcome, friends, associates, colleagues, fellow members of the IIC to this 50th anniversary of the inauguration of the Gandhi-King Plaza. Now we go back to 1970, 21st of January. So on that day, you see, this is pre-emergency, and Indira Gandhi is now talking of, she talks, since that day, she talks of dedicating the plaza, and I hope it will always be a reminder which hurts, a reminder which hurts us for our own weakness, which hurts and reminds us of the gaps in our work and our effort. And if in that way it can inspire us to greater work, I think you will have achieved a very great deal. Now this, we'll of course be talking of the emergency, which she did a very hurtful thing. So it's, how things change. Here she's talking of hurt, and she's talking of Martin Luther King and Gandhi. But then she does all the kinds of things which she shouldn't have. This is the timeline we have, 1970 to 2020. So this is the first political assassination which takes place on the 5th of June, 1970. In that time, we used to call it Bombay. And Kishan Desai, a labor leader, is killed. And this is linked with the Shiv Sena goons. And the whole Bombay politics changes after that. He is a sitting MLA. And he's, first they attack the Girni Kamgar Union, and then they kill this brilliant trade unionist. So that's the first peg we are on. And now then we'll go to the emergency, and I'll ask Gautam Vora to come and speak on it.
The emergency, I was very depressed by it. I had taken up journalism, and I had illusions then. I was in my 20s. I had illusions that I'll change the system, or at least fight it, and right wrongs to the extent that I could. And in 75, a few years after I had become a journalist, the emergency was imposed, and press was curbed. But before I get into my own personal depression or dilemma, let me give you the larger picture. Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed imposed or proclaimed the emergency in 1975, citing Article 352 of the Constitution. Elections were suspended, all civil liberties were curbed, and of course, the press was curtailed. Press was stopped altogether. All political opponents were put in jail, not only of the left, but of the right, and even the Congress. For even Congress members opposed the emergency. There's an estimate given, the estimates of the number of people who went to jail. Amnesty has given something between 40,000 to a lakh. The government admits to about 36,000. The vast majority were prisoners of conscience. They were picked up from the street, put into prison without trial, and under interrogation, many died. There were even fake encounters. This is one aspect of the excess. The real excess was imposed by Sanjay Gandhi. He had a 5-point program, and many people thought it was an impressive program. Two aspects of the program that got him infamy was the beautification program of Delhi. The beautification program involved demolitions, and demolitions of slums. So it was in Turkman Gate, when people resisted the demolition of their homes, that Sanjay got the most criticism. But even more criticism was directed at him for his forced sterilization program. This too was directed against the Muslims, and he began to be seen as an anti-Muslim. Now, what was in what aspect of his persona erupted and made him authoritarian or dictatorial? Because studies, I've got a couple of books that have been written by people like Vinod Mehta and Khushwant Singh, show him as a very retiring, average guy. I remember him in class. He was a classmate of mine. And when Vinod interviewed me, I told him that he took part neither in games nor studies. Doon being a public school based on the Eton Harrow model, placed a lot of emphasis on sports. And if you did well in sports and marginally in academics, you did well. This guy retired from both. And in the interviews that Vinod has done of the masters, they point out he was not stupid, but he was just not interested. Maybe this aspect, his withdrawal, made his parents take him out, made his mother, because Feroz had died by then, made his mother take him out of school. And this taking him out made him into the kind of difficult, dangerous person he became later. And both Martin and others said the same, that this aspect of taking him out made him the autocrat. But his mother totally depended on him. So much so that they asked, and there are many series of portrayals of him being so ruthless that when she disagreed with him, he is supposed to have slapped her. I don't buy that. Neither does Vinod, nor does anyone, Khushwant. But this is the kind of person he was projected at. Now, excesses certainly of the emergency, but amazingly enough, when we look back now, we all are determined to say that the emergency was awful, but it has supporters. J.R.D. Tata, when it was lifted, said that it put an end to strikes, brought in peace, productivity increased. State governments that were being dismissed offhand, but again, not treated in the same manner. Righteous and communal organizations that were going on unchecked, all came under control. Crime declined. So, especially family planning, some people still support the family planning. I think emergency was an aberration. But to say that everyone, maybe everyone certainly in this room, but everyone in the country supported it may not be correct. Now, I've given you an idea of what Sanjay was. And now let me tell you what it meant to people like us who were in journalism. During my time, we had fairly eminent editors like Shamlal and Girilal. They were very able and perceptive commentators. I don't think Arun Shuri had come in at that time. Of course, he took Indian Express to different heights because his investigative journalism was bold and definitely daring. And I certainly admired that kind of journalism. But as far as commentative journalism was concerned, I think Times of India was good. But when the emergency came, these guys just gave in. And my faith in and these editors who I looked up to just crumbled. Few of us, there was someone like a chap called Sundar Rajan who shared a cabin with us. He went to prison. From Indian Express, from the Times of India, he went to prison. From Indian Express, Kuldeep Nair did. There were others, and there were some certain exceptions. But by and large, the press was asked to bend, and it crawled. That is the famous statement of that time. And all of us, the younger lot who had joined, had nowhere to turn to. And my faith in journalism or wanting to do interesting or major things just went. I'll leave you with one more thought. What has happened now? Are we very different in the current scenario with the kind of electronic journalism that not only supports, but backs and promotes the establishment any better than in the emergency? I remember doing a Doordarshan program, and Doordarshan was the only program, only electronic media available then. I did a series of talks called Firing Line, where we got a whole series of government servants to the podium, and they were made answerable to us. They trembled at many of these issues when we took them up on public. You can't do that now. The whole media, electronic media, again, barring honorable exceptions, are sold to the establishment. So I'll leave you with this thought. Emergency then. How is the media any better now? Thank you.
Thanks, Gautam. Can we move to the next one? So that's Bhagalpur blindings. Now we are in 1980, and it's Tapan Bose.
I suppose I'm here because Suhas Borkar thinks I should talk about my film. It happened in 1979, 1980. Stories started coming out in the newspaper that in the district of Bhagalpur in Bihar, the police were going about blinding under-trial prisoners by puncturing their eyes with needles or cycle spokes and pouring acid into their eyes. I was a young documentary filmmaker, and having suffered, like many others, in 1975, having been thrown out of Doordarshan for not towing the line, and my series cancelled, I was making basically a living through making ad films in those days, because ad films actually what got you money, not the films division kind of documentaries. I wasn't a great civil rights activist in those days, though I joined PUCL after the emergency was over. I went to the Supreme Court and saw 13 of them whom Kapila Hingorani had brought to Delhi. And when I saw them, and I talked to some of them, I was completely shattered. And I was actually frightened. I was shit scared looking at them, wondering if this can happen in these days in the largest democracy of the world. And it can happen in broad daylight, and apparently with a lot of support from the gentry of Bhagalpur and also from Bihar. And mind you, 79 is also, we are already, by then things had changed. Encounter had already started. More than 30,000 young boys and girls, activists of the Naxalite movement, disappeared. Siddharth Shankar Ray had introduced to us this concept of encounter. I must say, I hadn't seen a policeman with a gun in Calcutta, where I was born and brought up, till about the mid-60s. Things had changed. But the blinding really frightened me. And I said, what can I do? What would be my response? And I decided I'll make a film, because that's what was my media. And, I went to Bhagalpur. I met those families. I met the children, very young boys, some of them minor. Shaligram Sahu, very young boy, 17 or so. And what I learned was absolutely horrific. This has been going on for actually some time. And There were several police officers, the DSP, the SP, and the DIG of the range, doctors in Bhagalpur District Hospital. They were all involved. We discovered evidence against some doctors who actually had injected acid into the eyes of these young people in police station, also in different places. We recorded all that evidence. Most of it came out through an inquiry commission that was set up, headed by a very, very competent senior police officer, Lalit Vijay Singh, which became a part of the case in the Supreme Court. Though government of Bihar had tried its best under the CRPC 172 and other sections, I forget, to block that report from coming into the hearing. And it's a long story that went on and on and on. And finally, only 3 police officers were found guilty. Initially, they tried to say it was all done by the constables, which was a lie. Not a single constable was ever involved in the blinding of these people. All the victims I spoke to, they said that we were blinded by officers and by doctors. But for the courage of of this superintendent of Central Jail of Bhagalpur, Mr. B.L. Das, this wouldn't have really come out. And B.L. Das said to us, and he says it in a long interview in my film, that they were bringing these people and their eyes were gone. Some of them had, gaping wounds. They were not given any treatment. There were, even maggots coming out of those eyes which had collapsed and rotted. And he said, I didn't know what to do. So he said, finally, I told the superintendent, SP of the Bhagalpur, that, you have to, before you bring them in, you have to give me a medical certificate. And they must be examined. Without that, I will not accept them. He said this was going on, and he was completely intimidated, and it came all the way from the DG jails, as well as from the Chief Secretary of Bihar in those days. So the only thing he could do was to allow quietly a couple of young journalists. I think it was Abdi, who was then also a very young journalist working for the Sunday, and another person from Indian Express who was posted in Patna. He allowed the 2 of them to visit and meet these people. And that's how the story broke. Akbar was then the editor of the Sunday. And he did a courageous job, no doubt about it. Then, of course, it became a national and an international story, and Khushwant Singh was then the editor of Illustrated Weekly. They did a major coverage of what had happened, Indian Express. Arun had by then become the editor. And in fact, he was very helpful in doing the film. But while doing all this and recording the interview and looking at and talking to the people and getting the response of the business community and others, it became quite clear that, the whole issue is not just an aberration, a brutality. It's been going on, and that kind of thing has been going on in Bihar for a long time, and it was rooted in the landlordism and the landlord, bureaucrat, businessman nexus which ruled Bihar all along. Bhagalpur was a place where there were huge quantities of land owned by 1 or 2 families, hundreds and hundreds of acres. Not only that, they also owned the riverfront. There was what is called the jamindari of the ghats, and so the people there the poor had very, very little options. It's a very old town. It has one of the oldest universities. It's a place very large, Bengali diaspora, Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay, the famous Bengali writer, was born and brought up there, and most of his stories have stories about Bhagalpur. So I decided to expand this and locate it in that exploitative kind of a society that Bihar was. And so we went to Bodh Gaya, and we examined what the Bodh Gaya Mutt was doing, owning again thousands of acres of land illegally. Yeah. Then I went to Muzaffarpur. So the Indian story is what I called it. Basically located the Bhagalpur blinding, this cruelty, this absolute kind of reckless violence that the police could perpetrate, and thought they could get away with it because they were protected under the Indian Police Act of 1861. The justice that the people got is really nothing. The Supreme Court, though, said that we must recognize, and Justice Bhagwati was, I'll just conclude, Justice Bhagwati was the judge, but what that case did, though the amount given was paltry, what it did was, for the first time in India, the Supreme Court recognized that police brutality must be recognized as an illegal act and compensation must be given to the victim, though it was 500 rupees only in those days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tapan. I would request the other participants to please keep the time limit of 5 minutes, because otherwise we have still 40 years to go, It's a long time. We just covered 10 years, so it'll become a little tough. I've been just reminded, we missed out on lighting the lamp. I think we should do that. So can I request the three women speakers, and the youngest among them and the senior most. So we have Humra, Pamela and Gargi, and John and Mujibur. Now we go to 1983 and the Nellie Massacre. Can I request Pamela?
I really didn't prepare for Nellie, but I wanted to tell you that I believe that it is a very important moment. And we tend to forget Nellie, although we remember 1984 and we remember 2002. And why is that we don't remember Nellie is something that we should ask ourselves. After all, what is this whole exercise of remembering? It is a struggle against forgetfulness. And I'm sorry that the younger people of our community didn't actually turn up today, because we have to pass on memories. And understanding what happened in Nellie is important at this moment because of the citizenship issue that has now flared up. And we know that behind the citizenship issue is the entire religious polarization between Hindus, Muslims, and between various others. The minority-majority divide was completely and brutally exposed in the Nellie Massacre. The number of people who died it's actually, people say it's 1,800, but it could be as much as 5,000. And it happened within a very short time. 6 hours is what some reports say. That means it was a literal mowing down of people on the basis of their religion. So I think today we should remember Nellie in fact, always keep it at the back of our minds, even as people come out and struggle against the CA and the NPR and the NRC, the regime that will repolarize this country in an amazing way if we allow it to happen. So I'll stop here, and I'll come back later, perhaps, as we go down this journey.
The next one, John. This is actually like a collective catharsis, I mean, if I can say, use that phraseology. Yeah.
I'm a staff reporter, which means I don't really go where I want to go, but I go where I'm sent. So it is good to have seniors and editors who send you where you want to go. Usually you have the wrong reporter in the wrong place, and that explains much of the coverage that we see today. Bhiwandi happened for many reasons. I'm not prepared. I'll take time to recall. But some of the visuals I thought I will share with you. I went to a mill, and the mill had very nice lal bajri, where the cars come in, drop the empty, and go away. There's a separate entrance for the workers, the ticket counter where they have to check in their cards and so on and so forth. And we got off the car I'd hired in Mumbai, and on the bajri was not the police outline of a dead man that you see in films, hand spread, but a greasy imprint on the bajri. And after some talks and others, I realized that was the grease that had dripped off a man who had been burnt alive at that spot. That was something I hadn't realized, that man does leave his, dead men do leave their mark. Bhiwandi at the time, we have to link it up with the whole tussle between power looms, non-power looms, the larger politics of Maharashtra, and the continuing. Pamela mentioned the Hindu-Muslim divide. I don't think it has ever died out in the years since partition. It always comes up. We have seen it, even during the emergency. I was then a reporter, and we saw how the beautification plan had a very major component of communalism in it, and his majorest thing was something he didn't tell you was supposed to be a boulevard connecting Connaught Place with Jama Masjid. We would have demolished.
John, excuse me, can
Yeah,
you switch off your mobile because I think there's something happening to it.
No, it's not.
No, it's not?
Not my mobile. Anyway, it's in my pocket. Well, it's not just Bhiwandi, Thane. The whole gamut of the small communal riots that take place, the economic reasons behind it, the strife, whether it's Kanpur or Bhiwandi. Bhiwandi was major. And that's again something that we have to again think of. It was also meant to disenfranchise economically the Muslim working class, the technicians, the small mill owners. It was, from what I recall, suddenly jolted back to Bhiwandi. Was also, I think, the wrong faith put in when armies make flag marches. The SLI was asked to make a flag march there, Sikh light infantry, and a more brutal regiment is very difficult to identify. But they did restore immediate peace. But it was, when armies restored peace in curfew areas, it's a very one-sided peace. It allows X to roam around, bans Y from moving out of its kasbah, its basti, whether you have to go out for milk, whether the child is crying or whatever. But the army flag marches were effective. These people came in battle dress, in their military 3-tonners and 10-tonners, restored, violently restored peace and went away. Has Bhiwandi and Thane, has the district healed in the years? And I want to conclude with that. I was recently in Thane and that area for a very different thing. I am accused of maligning the RSS and am facing a trial in Thane. So I had gone there. It reeks. It reeks no longer of the grease of the burning man, but it reeks of very palpable, tactile, stinking communalism. You land there, if you're sensitive to these things, you see it all along. You see it in the signage on the vans, on the cars, on the taxis. You see it in the courts, on the things on the wall, the calendar art. And I think that is something we have to live with or fight. The communalism that has seeped in deep in police, in the security forces, in all the other things. I'll talk of it more when I come to my subject.
Can we have the next one? We're just going to mention that. The next one.
Thanks. As you can see, I've just been recruited as a Stepney.
It's not by design.
I must say this is one of the formative years of my life, 1984. I had come back as a young faculty member to IIT a few years earlier. And the day Mrs. Gandhi was shot, when we got the news that she's in the hospital, and I'm supposed to be a scientist, engineer, so one is supposed to be inquisitive. So I borrowed a friend's moped from IIT, because since I was Center for Biomedical Engineering, I also had a Ames ID card. So I thought I could go in and find out what's happening. So I got onto the moped and went to Ames around 12 o'clock. And then I realized you can't get in because it was all surrounded by cops. There's a big crowd there. And the crowd started getting agitated. And some people started turning up. And very quickly in front of me, a Sikh was beaten up. His pagri fell on the ground, and they burnt his pagri. And actually, I have photographs of that, which also went to the later inquiry commission. And there were policemen standing by who were not doing anything. It took the next few days for us to understand. Then my friend, IAS officer Ashok Jaitley, told me that what I was thinking was correct, that no such violence can take place without police and state involvement. And I think this is something we have to understand. And as you said, if I wish young people, it's something which just cannot happen unless the authorities are involved. And we didn't know it then. And then the next night in front of my house, I was just standing in the driveway, and we saw a bunch of goons approach. And next door home was a small half-built house in which a Sikh family lived. And they had numbers. And they wanted to know if the Sikh family lived there. And amazingly, a 9-year-old girl from our other neighbor came out and said, no, there are no Sikh families here. And they went away, and they burned the taxi stand at the end of the road. So, and this young girl who, nothing, I know how she did, how she thought of it. So they were saved. But to cut it short, what we saw in the next few days was unbelievable. I saw dead bodies on the road. I saw burnt bodies. And very quickly, and actually one of our friends was supposed to write a history of what happened in the next 2 months, but it never happened, so people don't know the details. One amazing thing happened was that the middle class, upper middle class, and even a few upper class people got involved as Nagri Ekta Manch and established headquarters at Lajpat Bhavan, sorry. And we had peace marches starting from the first day. And within 3 days or 4 days, we had a few hundred volunteers with donations. We had 8-9 trucks, a few dozen cars going to all the camps where Sikhs had taken refuge, arranging things. And while this was going on, a few got an idea that the stories we are hearing from the victims in the camps and gurdwaras, They're all telling the same story on what happened. And so a bunch of people from Gandhi got together, and for the next 10 days we did investigations, and the result of that was the report, Who Are the Guilty? And it's the first, one major report which is written against all opposition. You have to, what was interesting is, because we are going to name people in it, your father was one of the people who said we should do it. All the other important people said we won't do it. You'll be killed, you'll be threatened, there'll be court cases against you in all the states. But Govind Mukhati, your father, Mr. Kannabiran, and Rajni Kothari took responsibility and said the report has to be written without the people's names in it, and our names will go on it as PUCL and PUDR chairman. So what was very interesting is the most liberal people said you shouldn't write the report, and so on. But it got written, and we know what happened because of that. But the point I just wanted to stress is that I think it's very important to document what happens and what people do, because I think it gives strength in the future to many people that these things can happen. That is, how it is done and how criminal the state can be. And I think it's very important to understand that fake news is spread by the state and not people. Just look at the US and UK. The president and prime minister, because of the fake news of weapons of mass destruction, millions of people have been killed and displaced. Ordinary people cannot spread fake news. Ordinary people can only spread fake news because they're mentored by their political bosses and encouraged. The fake news is spread by Modi. The fake news is spread by Amit Shah. And so once we understand that, we stop blaming. Facebook may be as evil as possible, Twitter may be as evil as possible. Without these other people who are criminals, Facebook and others cannot spread fake news. And because of fake news, things like 84 can be justified while it's happening. And I'll finish with a little bit of this. Doctors were not treating sick patients as today in UP in 84. We know that. Personally, I know that personally. Relatives were saying, don't drink the water, it's poisoned. Sikhs have done it. Families, Punjabi families, who were proud 3 days earlier that one son gets married to Sikhs, overnight become enemies of Sikhs. So this is something, so enemies can be created by the state. We must understand this idea that what John was saying, you said that there's this problem between, that always exists in societies. But it is the state which creates enemies. And I think we must understand that. Otherwise, in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, where there was the highest proportion of interfaith marriage, more than 30%, overnight they were killing each other. And so this whole idea of the state, the criminal state, and how it can make people do things which normally they don't do, and how everyone cooperates. And the second part I just wanted to mention was how we can react. People who had never been activists through Inaugurate the Munch, in the next 3 months were activists. I think at least a few thousand homes were resettled, cooking utensils were given, clothes were given, homes were rebuilt, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to promote both sides. How we can resist and help, and it happens if you do it, and how the state, that is state violence versus criminal violence. It's the job of criminals to do criminal acts. And it's the job of the state. So terrorists are supposed to be terrorists. Come on, don't ask them not to be terrorists. That's their job. It's the job of the state to control it. But it's not of the job of the state to be criminals. And unless we understand about all these events, that let us take the attention away from criminals, because their job to be criminals, and bring it to the state who are not supposed to be criminals. Thank you.
So we come to another event of 1984, and that's the Bhopal gas disaster. And then we ask Tapan to come again.
This is again because of another film that I had made on Bhopal disaster. I did mention both my films, that Indian Story, which is what I call on the Bhagalpur blinding, and the film on Bhopal were banned by the censor board. And in both cases, I had to go to court, long court battles, and finally got the censor board to clear it. I mean, I had to do a lot of lobbying, for Bhagalpur. I went to Satyajit Ray and all kinds of people to see the film, to recommend it, and so on and so forth. But in those days, there was space, You could go to people, you could get people to see your film, people to read your book and comment on it and take issues and openly speak and support. We don't have that space anymore. Just around the time when the anti-Sikh program was going on in different parts of the country, the biggest industrial disaster happened in Bhopal. According to the state government figures, it's more than 3,700 people who were killed immediately. And around 4,000 people were permanently disabled. They initially said it was about 500,000 people who were injured by that gas leak. Subsequently revised it to nearly 0.7 million people. It's one of the biggest industrial disaster that has taken place, and the way it was handled. It happened because of utter and complete criminal negligence of the management. They were using a chemical called methyl isocyanate, MIC, which was one of the most reactive chemicals in the world. And actually they did not much knowledge about this chemical. It was used as an agent they were using phosgene, they were using all kinds of chemicals and noxes to create some pesticide. The point is that MIC was also being used by the same company in a factory in the United States. And when we got the manual from the Union Carbide, we found that MIC had to be stored at something like 3 degrees centigrade, 3 to 7 degrees. There was a whole protocol of storing it, and in fact, in this place in Virginia called Institute, it was never ever really stored in large quantity. It was produced online only at the time when they were doing the processing of the other chemicals. Here, they stored it because it was cheaper. They abandoned all the safety measures that had to be taken. They had switched off, closed down the cooling plant, the refrigeration. They had, and this has been in storage, this chemical, for nearly 2 years, was not really being used. All the safety valves had corroded and broken down. The gas scrubber was not functional. And the management took all these decisions. We found out all this deliberately to cut cost. Not only that, between 10:15 on that night of 2nd January to about 1 o'clock in the morning of 3rd January, things were happening around the tank, and the workers were going around and they were looking at it and going back and reporting and, calling out the production manager, who did not bother to visit the factory till about 1 a.m. By then, the gas had already broken free and it was already in the atmosphere. And Mr. Ranjit Singh, the commissioner of Bhopal, when I spoke to him a week later, he said to me that he called up Mukund, who was the production manager, J. Mukund, at about 1:30 when the police control room called him and said, "Sir, there's a great disaster and gas has leaked out and people are dying." So he said he called Mukund and Mukund said, "No, sir, don't worry, nothing, everything is okay, we're bringing it under control." So if you look at the level of criminal responsibility, and we're talking about the state, let's look at the industrialists, let's look at the capitalist class of this country for profit, what they would not do. Bhopal is a living example of that, and we should never forget it. We should never forget that it's not just the state alone, the state industrialist combination of this country are the killers of our people. One of the things that I found out, they had two sirens in the factory, one internal and one for the external, for the colony around. The external one was disconnected. It never went off when people were dying. I spent 10 months in Bhopal after the disaster. And, the cases went on. And Mr. Arjun Singh and others, they played all kinds of games. And again, basically, you see, the primary victims were Muslims. Around the Union Carbide factory, there were slums, and slums were mostly occupied by Muslims and poor people. So it didn't matter, It has never mattered. Whether in Bhopal or whether in Delhi or in Gujarat or what's happening now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapan. The next one, we'll come to the 2002 Gujarat riots later. So we'll now go to the next one, the Hashimpur Massacre, and it's Mujibur Rahman. This picture, in fact, was used as evidence, this very one. It was done by a journalist from Delhi.
Yeah.
Praveen.
Well, I wasn't aware of this particular format about it. He just told me that I would say something connecting to Hashimpura. And unlike others, I don't have that kind of credibility of either reporting or writing on Hashimpura as such. I think the most authentic account of Hashimpura violence that I have read, and I would certainly urge those who haven't read must read, I'm sure many of you who have worked on communalism must have read it, is by Bibhuti Narayan Ray. His book, Hashimpura, May 22nd. He was the superintendent of police at the time and subsequently thought that decided that it would be a part of his life cause to kind of investigate further and author this book. And I had the honor of writing a short review of that book for Hindustan Times. And I just try to set share some facts about that particular violence. So May 22nd, 1987 to December 15 of 2019, when the Jamia violence happened, one would probably suggest that there is some sort of difference in the political context in which Hashimpura happened, in which Jamia violence happened. But one comes across a very strong connection in a manner that both the things have happened. And that makes very important for us that when we are debating and discussing the massive ideological shift that is taking place in our country, why it is important to recognize that even in the pre-Modi era, there were too many things that have happened that has contributed to the legitimacy to most of the violations that are taking place in today's India. One of my students called Mustafa is a direct victim of that violence. Mustafa is a very enthusiastic and sincere student, and he was reading in the library on that day. And when police unleashed lathis on students, he tried to protect his head by covering his head with fingers, and they damaged all his 10 fingers. So there is a YouTube account of his available, and he also gave the statements to some media. When he was taken to custody in the local police chowki, and he was bleeding profusely, some of his students requested the police officer that he should be taken to the hospital, otherwise you die. Then the police officer said, let a couple of them die. How does it matter? You can connect all this story to Hashimpura. As all of you know, that May 22nd, PSC 41st Battalion decided to round up roughly around 500 people and then selected 42 people who were kind of direct victims of the violence, took them away and shot them, and is generally described as extrajudicial killing. In a truck which was headed by, the battalion was headed by Sundarpal Singh. Bibhuti-Narayan Rai writes in his book that several times he interviewed this gentleman to figure out what could be the reason that motivated him to lead this team to indulge in this violence and killing. The only thing he concluded that the reason what motivated Sundarpal Singh and his team to carry on that violence was that the Muslims to be taught a lesson. So today, when we listen to this entire discussion concerning CAA, and we hear arguments like that, an inch will not be changed from that bill, I begin to read as if there is no inch of space would be given to Muslims in this country. That is the sort of argument that comes out of your political leadership. Any student of political science will tell you that the nature of state is very much identical to the nature of people who run the state. So from that point of view, the police conduct essentially reflects the sort of mindset or ideology, however you call it, determines the relationship between their actions and those who become their victims. I'll just take 1-2 minutes. Yeah. When you read that book, it's very interesting that you come across there are Muslim officials who were in a very influential positions, and they were very indifferent to the consequences to the victims, even afterwards. There was a gentleman called Sayyid Khalid Rizvi who was SPCID. There was Naseem Zaidi who was the district collector. Yeah. And I was completely surprised that, in fact, in Bibhuti-Narayan's narrative, he also discusses that how indifferent and unhelpful was Mohsin Kidwai. But you come across a very positive portrait of Sayyid Sahabuddin in that book, who was very helpful in creating a lot of legal support, generating some legal support to these victims. I would like to read the judgment, the verdict of Delhi Trial Court on March 21st of 2015. And the trial court said this: It is very painful to observe that some innocent persons have been traumatized and their lives have been taken by the state agency. But the investigating agency, as well as the prosecution, have failed to bring on record the reliable material to establish the identity of culprits. In that particular verdict, obviously, everybody was scot-free, and in a manner that investigation was followed. There were two major investigative reports that were prepared, one by the Criminal Investigation CID report, and otherwise a commission of inquiry, I think led by Gyan Prakash. Neither of them was made public. The Gyan Prakash report was submitted in 1994, and it was not presented to the Assembly. CID report was submitted in 1996. Only 19 low-ranking police officers out of 66 were named, and inquiry report was not made public. So this observation by the court, very much similar to the Ayodhya verdict. You'd come across where the court says that these are all illegal things, but then the ownership goes to somebody else. So here you'll also come across a similar kind of things about it. So in a nutshell, one comes across that the fragility of India's secularism, the vulnerability of Indian state, in a manner it has responded to some of the fundamental rights or the violations of fundamental rights, is indeed a very much a continuous story. Today, when we look at and try, when some suggest that there is some sort of an abrupt emergence of majoritarianism and the violence associated with it, I think we need to ask this question and probably would agree that this is not indeed very abrupt. There are deeper connections and there are enough violations that have taken place which are not adequately addressed, which were not adequately dealt with, which created the ideological climate, institutional legitimacy and institutional climate for all these forces to emerge as the hegemonic forces as they have become today. Thank you.
Yeah, the next one. Can we take the next one? Yeah, the next. Yeah. And the next one. Yeah. Shumit, on the demolition.
Well, Mujibur Rahman was speaking about Hashimpura. But when you discuss the demolition of the Babri Masjid on December 6, 1992, you have to take into account very important factor. Just before the demolition took place, the Chief Minister then of UP made a solemn assurance before the Supreme Court that the disputed structure will not be touched. And what happened, we all know. That very evening, some of us, journalists, were invited to a journalist meeting at one of the newspaper offices, and we saw with our own eyes how the people who had assembled, they were allowed to enter the surrounded place, and there was no resistance as such by anyone. Before we mention about this, I would like to also inform you something which a few of us had requested an eminent bureaucrat who had retired by then, requesting him to lead us to the spot and prevent such a thing from happening. we didn't have any means to protect the mosque, but we would only protect the mosque in the sense we will just go round the mosque and see that no one comes and vandalizes it. This was unfortunately, that gentleman, he did not pay heed to that. Not that we would have been able to prevent it, because the other side, the adversary, was far more than a few of us who were there. But at least it could have been a symbolic gesture on our part, which did not happen. So I would say what happened on December 6, 1992 was the first frontal and open attack by the majoritarian forces on the entire democratic secular polity. And we all know the result. In the last 6 years, we have seen how that attack has now fructified into something else. Precisely because the levers of power are now handled by those who are controlling power at the center. And they have no reason to feel less emboldened, precisely because they have the majority with them, and also the backing from the people through successive elections. So this is precisely what December 6, 1992 means to all of us. It is etched in our collective memory. And I don't know how we will be able to wipe out that memory. At least, in my opinion, not in the coming few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. The next one, put the next one. Okay, the next. Yeah. The next one. The next one. Yeah. John?
I did write a brief note. I think I will read it rather than do from memory, just to save time. And it's not because of you that we are having this meeting on 21st. It was tonight, a few hours later, 21 years ago, that Graham Stuart Staines, who was an Australian missionary called, some sort of a paralegal person, paramedic person, who was working with lepers in Orissa, which has a pretty high percentage of Hansen's disease patients. He had brought his family, and Graham Staines and his two sons, pre-teenagers, Timothy and Philip, were burnt alive as they slept in a forest where they'd had a prayer meeting that afternoon. They were in a jeep. And when this mob surrounded them and tried to burn it, from memories of Bhiwandi and rekindled memories from Delhi, Sikh riots, they tried to escape. And then they were beaten back into the van till the flames totally extinguished them. I mention this because the man who was the leader was Dara Singh. He was a member of the Bajrang Dal, which is a militant wing of the RSS and the VHP, and he was a Gau Rakshak who specialized in harassing and occasionally killing, after extortion, traders who used to take cattle from Andhra, Orissa, Maharashtra to Calcutta and possibly to Bangladesh. It's a major cow belt route. He specialized in Gauraksha and killing people who he thought were necessary. Rahman, a cattle trader, had been killed by him. A Catholic priest, Arul Das, had been killed by him. But the killing of Graham Stuart Staines was a trend changer. He was a white man, blonde, two very pretty children. The images, he's alive, and his burnt bodies and the jeep went around the world. Hordes of European, Australian, New Zealand and Japanese journalists came. And suddenly, the international community, which had forgotten 47, which had forgotten 92, suddenly discovered that the land of Gandhi and Buddha had these elements, Dara Singh. I must just take time out for a minute to tell you, it doesn't end there. The Sessions Court sentenced him to death. He appealed in the High Court. The church did not object, and the judgment was changed to life term. The state went into appeal in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the life term, but in a very fortuitous line in the judgment, Justice Wadhwa, who had spent his youth in the YMCA while he was studying law, suddenly decided he should add the sentence that Graham Staines was killed because he was converting people. Suddenly the IPC has a new term that you must die if you preach or if you do anything. And this is a very important. Another thing, of course, that happened then, which has shades with Indira Jaising's statement. When they asked Gladys, his wife, what did she have to say? She said, I forgive the killers. And then the argument started, a person can forgive perhaps, but can the state forgive? Because these are crimes, all of them. We call them targeted violence. It's violence by the state itself also. But these are crimes against the state, and the state is the plaintiff in the courts all the time. And it's only of recent amendments that victims can also put in their lawyer to assist the public prosecutor. And this has been used against the church in particular, but also against the Muslim community. Why don't you forgive? Why don't you forget? Why don't we all move on? This moving on from crimes is absolutely why today's meeting is so important. We cannot move on from these scars till we remember what these scars, how these scars were formed. This is also the first time that Mr. Patnaik, who was in a coalition government with the BJP and eventually broke that coalition, had to admit in the assembly that it was the Sangha Parivar, the RSS, which had a hand in the killing that happened. But this is a slight time lapse. Later, in 2007 and 2008, no, let me just go back to that place. What did Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was then Prime Minister of India, do? The President had said it was a blot on the fair name of India. The Prime Minister sent his Christian minister, our friend George Fernandez, to Orissa. George thought there was a foreign hand in the whole thing, and it was created by missionaries and the Pope perhaps to besmirch India's glorious reputation. This has happened again and again. 7 years later, that is now 2007, 2008, the RSS struck again in Orissa, which has a long tussle between not so much missionaries. There are no, by the way, foreign missionaries in India. There are a few Jesuits and sisters who have been here for 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, which means some of them are 99 years old, who are either Indian nationals or on extended visas. And after 1956, no additional visas have been given to coming in of foreign missionaries. No preacher today is allowed on a legitimate visa to come on a religious visa. All people who come from Western Europe, when they apply for a visa, have to sign a small document which says, when in India, we will not take part in any religious activity, Christian religious activity. So 23rd August 2008, the RSS struck again. The previous day, the VHP leader of that area, who had been leading a long crusade against Christians, Lakshman and Saraswati, was shot dead, confessedly by Maoists. They thought they would teach now Christians a lesson. In the next 48 hours, you won't believe it, 6,700 houses were burnt. 370 churches were burnt. 400 villages were totally purged of all Christian presence. Homes, institutions, churches, and people. 67,000 people were in forests for their life, and they escaped the 1984 Sikh violence only because in Kandamal, where this was taking place, the forest is 2 meters from your house, and they escaped there. Later, 30,000 of them were brought to government refugee camps, where they stayed there for a full 1 year. We think 120 people were killed. Government doesn't accept that figure. We think a lot of sexual violence took place. One nun bid strong and filed a complaint. Her story is a different matter, is heart-rending, including how police treats women who have been raped. She, in the jail when they held a parade, identified some of her rapists. The magistrate who was writing it wrote exactly the opposite, that the nun, when presented with the suspects, failed to identify them. She stuck to her point. We went to the High Court refused. We came, Colin Gonsalves, to the Supreme Court in a PIL. The Supreme Court admonished the High Court for not having admonished the magistrate. The identification parade was held again. She identified them. They were found guilty. But so far, only 2 or 3 of them have been found guilty, and most of them have not done. The case remains open, therefore, and she has to every so often go to jail. When she goes to jail, there's a phalanx of RSS lawyers who grill her again and again and again. Now it's 10 years or more on the same thing. And in the earlier phase, as once more, when she used to go to the court, the relatives of the guilty would be there surrounding, cheering, clapping as she entered. Justice has not been done. There's so many cases. We filed 8,000 complaints. 2,000 were accepted. The police would always file FIRs on their own, listing the same person at 2 places, falsifying cases. And once the FIR has been filed, to get a second FIR filed was impossible. To say, we'll go on this, you bring the evidence. Brinda Grover at her behest did a survey, a review of the justice process, and wrote a report. It's a book called Justice Must Change Its Course. It tells you how in communal violence, from the magistrate on the spot to judges of the High Court, how blind, ignorant, or bigoted, as you wish, they can be when faced with this, and why the rate of people who are finally committed to a sentence is so abysmally low. In Kandamal, maybe it's not even 1%. Now government of UP is asking people to pay for damages. These were people whose houses were burnt. Government was asking, is your house half burnt or fully burnt? What do you do with a half burnt house? You can't live in it, and you won't get compensation. It took Colin Gonsalves 2 PILs and 7 years to get some, let's say, adequate compensation for the houses. Before that, it took us all sorts of pressures to ask the government to chip in and give some money. On day one of the violence, the collector said, you cannot go in with relief because you will give relief only to the Christians, and that will cause greater tension between Christians and Hindus. We told him, you bloody fool, we will give relief to those who need relief. He wouldn't agree. We had to come back again to the Supreme Court in a PIL. The Supreme Court told him, Krishan Kumar was his name, to allow missionaries and anybody else who wanted to go in with relief. Krishna Kumar, who is as guilty an officer as anybody else in not being able to control, not being able to, because the violence went on for weeks. He was awarded as a very efficient civil servant. He has gone places since then. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one. The next. Yeah. So it's Kamal. Can you please come?
So to make it easier for you, in the ceremony of the NDA rewarding people, they rewarded the killer of Staines. And I sent that to Jaitley, who at that time was alive. Okay, now, in dealing with Gujarat, we have to remember that there are two different lines operating. One is newspapers, discussions, and even some journalists who have done work on this. However, there is another line, which is the Modi line. I won't even say it's a RSS line, it's a Modi line. So on 1st March 2002, CM Modi said, I'm absolutely satisfied with how the police and government has handled the backlash. I'm happy the violence has been largely contained. This is after Godhra and the burning of S5 and S6 and of murder. So on March 1st, a Congress leader come trade unionist, Ehsan Jafri, very well known, he tried to get some support from the police because he'd been told he was going to be attacked. He had a large society called the Gulberg Society. He was extremely well liked, but the Congress did not have that courage. So what does Narendra Modi say? Before Congress leader Jafri's house was set ablaze, reports claim that there was firing on the mob from inside his residence. Then they say it is pre-planned and the incident seems to be a terrorist activity. Now, if he said shooting from inside, but no one there was armed, and they had asked for police support. So if they needed police support, they needed arms, but they didn't have arms. And Narendra Modi says people are shooting from inside, then where are the weapons? The weapons didn't burn, along with Ehsan Jafri and a lot of his people. And when he says it is pre-planned and the incident seems to be a terrorist activity. Now that is more true about Godhra and the two coaches, because when the SM Banerjee committee wanted to look at the coaches, Modi said, no, you can't touch them. And when the burning was over, Modi went to see the SDM in Godhra and told her that you must make sure that every 5 minutes, All India radio broadcasts what's going on. Then, on the 2nd of March, what does Modi say? It's a very brilliant statement. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, I don't know what opposite reaction Modi has, if he has a reaction. But this goes on. For example, Indian Express on 4th of March. What happened in Godhra? But the inquiry in Godhra cannot be related with any inquiry into the incidents later. Now, a number of things happen. One is that the Home Minister, Harin Pandya, gets very nervous about the amount of people dying. And he goes and speaks to Modi. Modi sends him to Shah. Shah is a little more gentle. He says, listen, don't get into this. But he insists. He says there are too many people dying. It is bad for our reputation. We can't allow this to happen. And suddenly, Harin Pandya disappears. Then his body is found, dead body, in a park where no one was able to enter. A few days later, Atal Bihari Vajpayee comes to Gujarat, to both Gandhinagar and Ahmedabad. And Harin Pandya's father tells him publicly that my son has been killed by these people. And so Atal Bihari Vajpayee talks to Modi about Raj Dharma, that you must have Raj Dharma, you must behave in this way. Incidentally, Modi never spoke to Vajpayee again. Then comes another problem. What do we do with the Muslims? So there is a lady, if that's not too strong a word, called Mayaban Kodnani. She goes to Naroda Patia, where she is, by the way, a minister, full minister, where 97 women are there. One of them is cut open and the fetus killed. And nothing happens. She goes to a number of trials. She's never convicted. And she goes back into the mainstream, as it were. Then comes the problem of what is to be done with the people in Godhra. After all, the Hindus in the train were car sevaks. So they wanted to do something on that. But by that stage, there had been too much press publicity. So then they tried to weed people out and send them into different areas. But there were other problems. How do we build from here to there? From Gujarat, making it a launch pad, how do we go out? And then it became the rule of the Sangh Parivar and others to move out and try to cover up what had happened in Gujarat. But the problem in Gujarat is that the courts are sold. Hardly any action is taken against a political person. And that was one of the... So, only one police officer who had a lot of courage and fired at the assailants was Rahul Sharma. But Rahul Sharma was very smart. He got into the telephone records involving Modi and others, and he gave the records to the authorities. Now, obviously it was embarrassing. So what they did was they suppressed it, but they couldn't do anything to Rahul Sharma. However, what has also happened is that the tribal people who are there in parts of Gujarat, they have also been sidelined. And essentially, it is a kind of twist. So what does the Chief Minister Modi say on 4th of March? He says the government has decided that the families of those killed in the Godhra attack will be paid rupees 2 lakh, while those killed in the violence following Godhra will get 1 lakh per victim. Now, the guys are in the violence in Godhra, they get 1 lakh. The guy who's killed will get 2 lakhs. So this is really RSS with a swing. And then the national president, Jana Krishnamurthy. The post-Godhra violence, though strongly condemnable, is a result of revulsions after Godhra. So this was a revulsion after Godhra. So what they're doing is deliberately focusing the issue of Godhra in the center, where there are Ram Sevaks, where there are people who've been burnt in carriages. And as Modi said, I have brought peace to the state in 72 hours. But Modi's arithmetic is not very good, because the violence continued for over a month. Then he gets very angry about a discriminatory treatment between the communities. Modi says, what discrimination? Muslims, tribals, Christians? No. I have brought peace to the state in 72 hours. The violence had actually continued for more than a month. And then, post-Godhra, what does he say? What discrimination? You media are all out to pull my government down. And he further says, what happens is secular violence, which happens during communal violence. Communal violence, after all, is not secular. So, in Gujarat, what has happened is that our understanding of Gujarat has been very poor. The media has looked for certain traces and slices of history and politics, but that's it. People who are secular politicians have somehow not gone to Gujarat over any long length of period. And what has happened is, using this mishmash of instruments, Modi has used Godhra and Gujarat as his pedestal to power. So it's something which has been very carefully done. There is no way they could have burnt coach number 6 and S6 and S5 in the way they did. I went in with the SDM. Everything was burnt except one area like this, where there was a hole in the middle. Burnt. Now, how can there be a hole in the middle if the two coaches are all burnt from inside? That's why I didn't want SM Banerjee to see the coaches. So now Godhra has become the talisman for the BJP. They would like to get some more, but this is actually Modi's area. So you have to listen to Modi if you want to get anything. Then look at the actors in this ceremony. Of course, you probably know that people from the RSS are not very fond of policemen. But they are fond of policemen if they're against Muslims. So from the police commissioner to Director General of Police Intelligence, please intimate about the number of Pakistani nationals in your district cities when they came. How many went back? How many have got Indian nationality? What are the activities at present? Please intimate the details in your cities who are involved in narcotic and smuggling activities. How many times have they been detained under Coffee Posa, PASA, NASA, and deported? Prepare the dossier with names and other complete details. Please, this is the last one, there are many. Please open the dossier of Muslim individuals who are involved in the offense of assault with knives or scissors. Scissors I haven't heard before, but this is a Modi. Rioting and murder, with their names and the copy of the same to be studied here. And then for all of us who are political, please intimate the names of political leaders with their names and their party who are supporting these criminals and assist them for release for help in the polls. Then, thanks to a friend in Gandhinagar, activist, I managed to go and see one of the district leaders of the RSS. I, in fact, even went with my papers and writing thing. They said, no, it's okay. You want to say anything, you want to write anything, We've done what we had to do, no problems. So I wrote 25 pages. And Father Cedric Prakash, who works in that area, he was completely zapped. He said, how did you write these 25 pages? So then I showed him the trick that actually it was about 12, 13 pages. I always left one page, open, just in case I'd lost something and put it in. But it wasn't necessary because in those 13 pages, he had given everything. How the plot was made, how they all went to the Sar Sanchalak at the top, then they went to the RSS, then they talked to the police. They said, you will not go in the following areas, you will attack so-and-so in these areas. And you can see from what they have said themselves that they have a particular mindset where the Muslims and others are enemies. And therefore, they are actually fighting the enemy. And we are the ones who are helping the enemy, as far as their logic goes. But what has happened in Gujarat is that there is no great unhappiness that this happened. They think, okay, like you do your business. They say, theek hai, let them do this. We won't do anything. But if anything comes, for example, in the Supreme Court, then they're up there. They're putting pressure on the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. You know what the two Chief Justices of the Supreme Court are like. From Ranjan Gogoi, the genius of NRC, to Bobde, who's still looking for his genius. So this is the situation in which Gujarat has placed us. And what is very important is we must displace this kind of information, this kind of lack of honesty, so that these kind of things don't happen again. Otherwise, in the Northeast and other areas, they could try and build up hostility using their search sanchalaks. Please remember that in the Nellie Massacre, Advani was there. The RSS was there, and Nellie is in that area. So I think from this message from Gujarat, we have to now look very carefully at what the Sangh Parivar is saying, what they're doing, and even things like, why did Shah suddenly become president and Nadda come in? We don't know, but obviously these are games inside the RSS, and if we are not careful, it's going to be even more difficult for us. Thank you.
Can we have the next one? Okay, the next one. Who will muzzle the cry from Vidarbh? 8 more Kisan suicides in one day. Gajanan Sadashiv Chaudhary of Nandura Khurd, Atul Manohar Sabre of Manakwadi, Naresh Bakaram Meshram of Valgaon, Gajanan Baburao Thombre of Amti, Lakshman Baburao Chaudhary of Barzadi, Nathu Ragholi Shri Rame of Dahoti, Saligram Farfat of Khandvi, Ajab Rao Ramji Sonane of Sukanda. The count this year till now, 909. Do you want to kill yourself here or migrate to the megapolis to a slow death? Who is next? Please line up. A firing squad with silencer muzzled guns will be more painless, silent and instant. Your cries will never pass muster through the cordons of the temple, usurped by pygmies wallowing in farcical one-upmanship. There is a cost to everything, a price to pay. Someone, somewhere, someday will pay for this. It won't be long. It won't be long. Can we move the next one? Yeah, the next. Yeah, the next. Yeah, now we've already heard John, so we won't do that. Now, next. Yeah, the next. The next. Yeah, Pamela?
Time is passing, so I will be brief. But I just want to say that the Nirbhaya rape case, it's interesting how it's become almost iconized. and the person behind it has also been brought to the public sphere. But the important thing is that particular moment changed the way the crime of rape was viewed by society in general. And the idea that there is something called, the rape creating machine. Now, when you talk of a rape happening, it's not just the incident, but it's the background in which it happens. And so the Nirbhaya rape was, of course, a very brutal one and will go down in history as a very terrible one. But the point is that it is not the first time that we have had such incidents. Why did Nirbhaya get the attention it did? And partly this can be explained by the fact that it had an urban background to it. It happened in our midst, and it created a certain sense of outrage in the public. People came out spontaneously. So in a sense, the protests of 2016 really, 2012, December, in a sense, got replayed over the years. And what we are seeing today in many ways reflects that early, almost leaderless outpouring of grief and protest that marked that moment. It's also important for the involvement of civil society in the sense that the Verma Committee report that was set up to inquire into this received no less than 80,000 responses from the public, which shows the amazing investment that people came to have in this particular incident. Now, I just want to leave you with one last question, and that is justice, the delivery of justice. And here again, I want to recall Indu's appeal to the mother of Nirbhaya. It is a difficult moment, and we know that when a family is involved in the justice system in the sense of being so closely involved with it, that it's difficult to disentangle oneself from the event. At the same time, we should ask ourselves, what are we doing as a society if we allow capital punishment to those 4 people? Because we know that they represent something, those 4 people. They have stories to tell us. Why do people get socialized in that way? And it is very important, I think, for us to ask ourselves whether this is the way they should die. Of course, this is a controversial thing, but I think it is something that most societies in the world have already decided that they will end capital punishment. And maybe the Nirbhaya moment, which actually helped us understand the nature of sexualized violence, will also make us understand a little bit about the justice that can be done in such cases. Thank you.
Next. Yeah, the next one. Next. Okay, Achin, please.
Yes, all 4 of them knew each other, and they were, of course, supportive of democracy and human rights. But there was a difference between Gauri Lankesh, who was a crusading journalist, and the other thing that were other 3, Pansared, Dabolka, and Kalburgi, who were part of the People's Science Movement, and which also carried out social welfare work in terms of having education camps and health camps. As far as Gauri Lankesh is concerned, she was one of those committed journalists who did not speak truth to power, because the powerful know the truth. She spoke truth about the powerful to the powerless, which is why that is so dangerous. And she is not the only one who has suffered from repressive regimes in various cases. So horrified as we are, we can understand the nature of that society, our society and others, in which powerful people are prepared to go after journalists, which sends a message to many existing journalists today in India. But the other 3, people's science movement. Why was there so much opposition to them, not just from religious godmen and monks and sons and mullahs and others, because of their fables and because of their hypocrisies or their deceits and so on? Why was there so much political opposition to them? And a lot of people who were powerful and political were very happy about it. And I think we have to understand this. Let's first understand the connection between a whole host of religious interlocutors, leaders, godmen and so on, who have of sects and so on, and political personalities, political leaders, political forces, especially when they're in government. Both religious personnel and political leaders have and want more and more support from ordinary people. That's common to both of them. What's also the case is that both have a tendency to move towards each other for functional reasons. In the case of religious sects and so on, it would be great if they get political support and protection and if they get resources. In the case of political leaders and political parties and so on, well, if the followers of those religious personnel and those religious sects and others transfer their support to us, that's great. However, this nexus becomes even more dangerous when it is no longer functional, but it is, if you like, characterized by an ideological glue which binds them together. And that ideological glue is religious nationalism. That is what is most dangerous. And when you have a religious nationalism, it means that those who criticize either those religious sects for their hypocrisies, their deceits and so on, there are all kinds of cures, and those political forces there, then you are doing something very, very dangerous, because you are not only anti-national, you're not only traitorous, you are blasphemous. And that makes things even worse. And there is always a problem between the people's science movement and many of those particular sects because of the whole question of their different understanding of belief. People's science movement, science, is about knowledge which is always to be understood as justified belief. Justified belief, justified by the principle of evidence, by the principle of explanatory power, and by the principle of internal logic. But beliefs, religious beliefs, many of them, not all, religious beliefs have a principle which is absent from science, because the principle of science, if you like, is provisional truth. You have to go deeper and deeper and deeper to understand that. All truths that you arrive at are better perhaps than previous truths, but they are provisional. We have to go on and on and on. We have to have a quest for more and more knowledge. But in religious, truth tends to be certain. It is to be faith-based. And that creates a certain tension, not necessarily because they also represent different needs, but nonetheless, when you have religious sects with godmen and others who are attracting people, not simply because of their philosophy, because most people are not too bothered about the philosophies of religion, but because they purport to be able to address their basic needs, their emotional needs, their bodily needs, all kinds of suffering that they have can be cured by this, that, etc. Then, of course, those who expose that becomes people who represent a particular danger. And, of course, when you have this merger in terms of religious nationalism, then, of course, you're going to have a much greater degree of opposition to them. And I think that's one of the reasons why we must understand what this happened and why there's, in fact, probably the same organization was responsible for the deaths and murders of all of them. I want to end in a certain sense by talking about this question of religious nationalism. A religious nationalism like in Iran is very bad, but it's not the same as religious nationalism in India, because India is a multi-religious society, which means that religious nationalism can go in the direction of communalism, of hostilities between different religious groupings and so on. And this merger, of course, makes one particular religion and one particular understanding of nationalism, or I should say not one particular religion, one particular interpretation of a religion and one particular interpretation of nationalism, if you like, special. And this kind of communalism in India, religious communalism must be opposed. We have both majority and minority. Do not moralize about only one. Do not say that one is morally worse than the other. They're all terrible. If we want to fight against them, we have to fight against all of these. But we must also recognize that majority communalism represents a danger which minority communalism does not represent. And what is this danger? The logic, ultimately, of a minority communalism is separation, moving away. The logic of a majority communalism is to transform the whole of that society in the name of nationalism. And this represents a much, much greater danger here. How do we fight it? And I end here. There are two understandings you can have of nationalism. One, that it belongs to the past, it's an inheritance, in which case there will always be dispute about what is the proper inheritance. It's Hinduism, it's this, it's that, it's civic, it's that. And who are the proper inheritors? It's not you Muslims, it's not Christians, it's not you, it's us, this, that, whatever. Or you see nationalism as something that does not belong to the past, but belongs to the present and future. It's something that we have to make. And in that particular case, especially in a society like India, where you have so many different religious faiths, such diversity here, there must be different ways of feeling Indian. But there can only be different ways of feeling Indian if that state and that society represents and respects their culture, their language, their secular needs and their commitments. And one of the strengths, if you like, of this kind of nationalism, that there are different ways, is much, much greater. And let me end by giving you a somewhat humorous story that perhaps gets this point across. There is a story about Obama and Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who met at an industrial trade fair. And in the corner there was a machine that could tell the future 50 years from now. So Trudeau tells Obama, why didn't you punch into the machine and tell us what the United States is like 50 years from now? So Obama punches it in, a piece of paper comes out, Trudeau says, read it. He reads it, it says, America is very peaceful, it's very prosperous, and the President of the United States is Miguel Velasquez Sanchez, and the Vice President is Chow Ho Fung. And Chinese is compulsory in all schools. And then Obama turns around and says to Trudeau, why didn't you tell us what Canada is going to be like 50 years from now? So Trudeau types into the machine, a big piece of paper comes out, and Obama says, read it. And Trudeau says, how can I? It's in Punjabi. They have 4 Sikhs, including defense minister over there. What's my point? My point, is that a reflection of the weakness relative or of the strength? And what we have to do here in India is to fight precisely that there are different ways of feeling Indian and being Indian, and that can only take place if you're prepared to respect everybody. And today there is just this struggle that is taking place here, and all of us are going to have to decide which side are we on, for a secular and democratic and humane nationalism, or for something very much worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Acharya. We have the next one. Quickly, let's move fast. The next one. Yeah. Gargi, please.
I won't take time. All the speakers also have gone. Now, it's about mob lynching. All of you know in the last few years, whatever happening, India virtually has become Lynchistan. And I can't give you the figures, maybe 700 or more than that, whatever happening, and throughout the country, not just UP, Bihar, Assam, Tripura, everywhere. Now, the important point is, it's not the work of the fringe elements. Many people, and even the journalists think it's the fringe elements of the ruling dispensation. To my mind, it's the mainstream elements, because we have seen that they are, whoever the killers, they are being garlanded, and they shared the dais with, I have seen with Yogi Adityanath recently, and more importantly, I was going through the newspapers. Indian Express, 12 September, 2018, Amit Shah, after each election, just mentioned this. When Akhlaq happened, we won. When award Wapsi happened, we won. Means each thing that happening, we are winning. That means it's kind of endorsement that is very frightening. Since today it's a day when we are remembering, the people who lost their lives, and only few cases struck the media. I need to mention, within a fortnight of Modi's first swearing in, it was this Mohsin Muhammad who was lynched to death in Pune, 4th June, by the Hindu Rashtra Sena for his alleged offensive Facebook post. Similarly, on 28 September, we need to remember, that's why I'm mentioning, Muhammad Akhlaq was lynched in UP, 52-year-old, by the cow vigilance, and son also seriously. It is just, it's a kind of remembrance. 18th March 2016 in Jharkhand, 32-year-old Mazloon Ansari and 15-year-old Imtiaz Khan, they were killed and they were hung from a tree. 11th July 2016 in Una in Gujarat, cow vigilance attacked 4 Dalit men after finding them skinning a dead cow. 5th April 2017, Pehlu Khan, a dairy farmer, we are recollecting, attacked by 200 mob in Alwar, and 4 others were also injured. 23rd June 2017, these are the, which people do remember, I'm recollecting them, attacked with a knife while he was traveling after buying, the Eid gifts from Delhi. It was in the Delhi-Bhagalpur train, and on the suspicion of eating beef. 2017, a terrible thing, lynching of Muhammad Afrazal, a Muslim daily laborer from Malda district of Bengal, and by somebody called Shambhulal Regar in Samand in Rajasthan, and who asked his nephew to videograph the whole thing and to be circulated in the social media. This year, on 22nd June, a 22-year-old boy, Tabriz Ansari, was lynched to death in Jharkhand by a mob which forced him to chant Jai Shri Ram and Jai Hanuman. Now the point is, brutality and sadistic nature of all these lynchings shocked us. But Modi, BJP leaders were silent. 49 intellectuals wrote a letter to PM, no reply. Rather, a counter letter was sent by Modi's supporters. Also, FIR was launched against those 49 well-known personalities. Today, if you protest, you express your dissent, anything, you will be branded anti-national, anti-Indian, pro-Pak, etc. So this is the difference with the earlier regime. Today, if Gandhiji was alive, all the time I keep thinking, what would we done? What would have been his reaction to such beastly lynchings? He undertook first, earlier we have seen several times, from the Kohat riot of 1924 onwards, till Noakhali and even at the last days, by those Hindu supremacists, and who could not tolerate his vision of Hindu-Muslim unity, togetherness, harmony, etc., killed him. Now, I'm coming to the main point. The assassin did not regret. All of you know the name of the assassin. And today he's hailed by BJP MPs, even in parliament, as patriot, as Deshbhakt. Let us not forget, these lynchers are carrying the legacy or the tradition of the ideology of the assassin of Gandhiji. Let us also remember Gandhiji's, one of his last prayers on 15 January 1948, when he said categorically that his fast was on behalf of the minorities of the Indian Union and Pakistan. He made it very clear that it was the imperative duty of the majority community to protect the minority, and it was not appeasement. So, let us not make Gandhi a symbolic icon with his specs on government advertisements. Let us walk into the footsteps of Gandhiji and expose those who are today walking in the footsteps of his assassin. I think that will be greatest tribute to him on this 150th anniversary, and we have to be very clear about it. There are two sides now, and no middle path anymore.
Thank you. The next one quickly, just 3 more now. Okay, Aloni, go ahead.
There are several incidents that have happened over a period of time, and though Suhas has made 2016 as a marker in order to understand the kind of a nature of violence that we are witnessing and the kind of a protest which are being made currently. However, I would like to submit that the 2016 incident, like what happened to Rohit Vemula and Una incident. These are very pivotal, no doubt about that. But there has always been such incidents happen even in the past since several years. Rather, I would say that if you go into the SC/ST Commission's atrocities report, which is regularly submitted to the government of India, you will notice what kind of a society we are. Are we really modern society? Forget about claims of postmodernity. Our claims of being modern is so cosmetic and so disgusting that we are not ashamed of killing our fellow citizens. The so-called nationalists are not ashamed of killing anyone. Their nationalism goes only in the killing of their own people. That is a kind of a nationalism we are propounding, and we are surrounded by these kind of scoundrels. Having said that, let me also recall that the organizations such as Ambedkar Periyar Study Circle, the organizations such as the Ambedkar Student Association, which were active on Hyderabad campus, and then Ambedkar Periyar Circle active on IIT campuses, you will notice that as and when people assembling across the caste, across the religious background, coming together and taking part in any kind of an activity or discussion which is based on the ideological formulations of Dr. Ambedkar, you will notice that the administration, the state, the established politicians, the established political parties, the intellectuals, the liberals, the leftists, and everybody, they come together to oppose these kind of initiatives. There is a history to it, and I don't want to go into these histories. The politics of hate, violence, anger has always been played all across 1950. And what one notices is that as and when there are protests by the scheduled castes, by the scheduled tribes, and by the minorities, you will notice that the successive governments have been using National Security Act to slap cases on them. And all the youths are butchered by these kind of FIRs and the kind of a judicial system we have, where the justice is a near impossibility. It is never a possibility. It is just a feeling of a disgust, where Dr. Ambedkar conceptualized state as an agency of change, as an agency of transformation, whereas currently the successive governments, be it is BJP, be it is Modi government, or even for that matter Congress, they have made state as a regressive, repressive, and all kinds of a crime, the state which is sponsored and imposed by the state. This is a kind of a state we have created. And what are our responses? Our responses is that of the abject surrenderity. You don't try to see the crime within your own society. You do not try to see the violence which exists within your own families. So all the people who claim the responsibility, they even do not come forward and write their own self-critique. That is a big trouble we have. And since there is no self-critique coming forth, there hasn't any initiation to change, to transform the society or made any kind of a transformation of the society. I would like to say that the politics in India has always been Ambedkar and anti-Ambedkar. Ambedkar represents the transformation, anti-Ambedkar represents the status quo and killing of the people and suppressing everyone. This has been a politics in the country. I'm not talking about the political parties. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about the politics itself, the nature of the politics itself. Whether it is left, whether it is Congress, whether it is BJP, whether it is Basapa and all those people, it has always been an anti-Ambedkar politics. That is a bizarre we have. And that is the kind of a situation we have created in. Now, the Chundur incident, the Karamchedu incident, the Bhatani Tola incident, or even Khairlanji massacres in a recent time, they point to the fact that Indian society is a caste-ridden, violent society. That they cannot come out of their caste hierarchies, they cannot come and they did not know as to where to go in order to kill this monster of caste. The majority and minority syndrome plays so much into the politics of even the caste, because what you observe is that who dies, whether it is this group or that group, it is all the lower caste who die. They are the one who become killer, they are the one who become victims. This is how it goes. The lower caste become the victims of the violence, and the lower caste also participate in the violence. But the majority of the violence is conducted by the caste Hindus. It is the caste Hinduness which becomes a huge problem in our society, and somehow we never pay attention to these kind of things. And at large, when it comes to 2018 Bhima Koregaon, what you notice is that it has been done with the state patronage, with the state support. And Bhide and Egbote are still scot-free, whereas those who have nothing to do with any kind of a violence have been put behind bars, and they are the ones who are facing the heat of the state. This is what democracy is all about. So the whole idea of democracy, that for the people, by the people, of the people, is all about for the caste Hindus, by the caste Hindus, and by the caste Hindus. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one, just two more. Yeah. Humra, please.
As we are already running very late, so I prepared a few points, but I'll just keep to the basic. Coming to this very, very tragic rape, and in fact, her body was broken. I think, although this is not the first time that rape was used as a tool to unsettle the other, but this was most because Muslim women were raped during the Gujarat pogrom, during Muzaffarnagar riots, during other riots by the RSS brigades or Hindutva brigades and cops. But this, because she being just an 8-year-old child, and the way her body was broken, I mean, it really, really unsettled a lot of people. But even here, there was politics. They did not let her parents bury her body in her own ancestral village. They had to carry that broken body 8 kilometers, where somebody gave her this much space to put her remains. And even here, on television, one saw BJP spokespersons justifying the rape. In fact, it reminded me this rape of this film called Hotel Rwanda, where in Rwanda during the civil war, they used rape as one of the tools to settle the other. And this child, I mean, she was just 8. But, I mean, what is happening today in 2020, where in Uttar Pradesh, police officers and men, I mean, constables, have touched Muslim women's breasts while searching, commented on those breasts. This is downtown Lucknow, and nothing has happened to them. Today, you know, the tragedy is you don't need an excuse to kill the other. You can just barge into their homes, what we've seen in Western Uttar Pradesh the last few weeks. You can molest women. You can take off their hijabs, their burqas, their veils, or anything, and nothing will happen to you. They've been cops in uniform, and they've been people in Vardi, but without the badge. So who are they? I mean, there's, either they're from one of these brigades that the right-wing nurtures, and it's so blatant. And not one of those men, the policemen, have been booked. I mean, there are open molestations on, I won't call them rapes, but yes, it's rape of the psyche. I mean, today there's rape of the form, of the body, and there's a rape of the psyche, which is going on, and it's so blatant. There's no need for Godra at the background, there's no need for anything. A cop has a sanction, at least in Western Uttar Pradesh, to enter any Muslim mohalla, break open the doors, pick up the women, pull off their hijabs, touch their breasts, comment on those breasts also, and break the bones of the menfolk, or drag them to the nearest police station or whatever thana. And some Muslim families who hired lawyers, the lawyers were also picked up by the crime branch and put in thanas, as if you can't even fight your legal battle. I mean, things have become really bad. It's like state versus the people. And it's very, I've covered Kashmir for 30 years. It's impossible to fight the state machinery. They can send 2 cops, they put one lathi on your head like they did to Aishi Ghosh, break skulls, break bones, and molest the women, if not rape them. And there have been reports of madrasa in western Uttar Pradesh where the cops even buggered 2 madrasa children, rectum bleeding. And we do nothing about these people. We do nothing. I mean, we are actually in a very, very helpless state, condition. I mean, state means we can't fight. So, I mean, it's a very hopeless situation where children are being used, their bodies are being broken, inserted with rods, with whatnot. And they can't be, and the parents can do nothing about it. So I find it's a very, very hopeless situation. And in 2020, I mean, it's reached the climax. I really don't see any hope, just nothing. And the way these things are going from the last few weeks, I'm from UP, I'm a Muslim from Uttar Pradesh, and even the so-called well-to-do families, Muslims, they're sitting very, very scared. What happened to Sadaf Jafar? A police officer in the Hazratganj police station, which is one of the prime police stations, because Hazratganj is so-called creamy area of Lucknow, the man kicking her in the abdomen till there was vaginal bleeding. Her pants got all soaked with blood, and nothing happened. The cop is not touched, I think, so as far as I know, till date. So I'll leave you on this because I really find it very, very depressing and very hopeless. Thank you.
Next quickly. Apurva, you have to come next. Come. The final speaker. Yeah, the next one. Yeah, please go ahead.
बहुत शुक्रिया. मुझे मालूम नहीं कि कहने को क्या बचा है, लेकिन ये बिल्कुल ठीक है कि आखिरी स्लाइड CAA और NRC की है, क्योंकि ये सब कुछ आखिरकार हिंदुस्तान में कौन शहरी रहेगा और कौन शहरी नहीं रहेगा, इसी का फ़ैसला है. ये बहुत दिलचस्प था और बहुत विडंबनापूर्ण था कि पिछले 50 साल का इतिहास जो हम देख रहे थे, उसमें अगर मील के पत्थर बनाए जाएंगे भारतीय राष्ट्र के, तो मील के पत्थर एक तरह से एक धीमे जेनोसाइड के पत्थर हैं. पाकिस्तान पे किताब लिखते समय हाल में एक लेखिका ने एक शब्द का इस्तेमाल किया है, वह है ड्रिप ड्रिप जेनोसाइड. हिंदुस्तान के लिए मुझे जायरुस बानाजी का वाक्य याद आता है या पद याद आता है, वह है सीरियल जेनोसाइड, जो चल रहा है और अब वो मनोवैज्ञानिक तरीके से चल रहा है. CAA एक मनोवैज्ञानिक हमला है मुसलमानों पर, भारत में रहने वाले मुसलमानों पर, ये बहुत साफ है. और NRC भी, मैं इसके ब्यौरे में नहीं जाऊंगा, आप सारे लोग जानते हैं और हमारे पास वक्त बहुत कम है कि यह सब कुछ असम में कैसे हुआ और अब पूरे भारत में दरअसल हिंदू दिमाग को एक शैतानी दिमाग में बदल देने की कोशिश है, जिसमें वह मुसलमान को अपमानित होते हुए देख के, बेइज्जत होते हुए देख के खुश हो. ये पूरी कोशिश हिंदू दिमाग को बदल देने की कोशिश है और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि इसमें काफ़ी हद तक कामयाबी मिली है. अभी तक हम लोगों ने जो कुछ देखा है, क्योंकि इंदिरा गांधी के उस उद्धरण से बात शुरू हुई थी कि इट शुड बी अ रिमाइंडर दैट कीप्स हर्टिंग अस एंड सर्टनली इट हर्ट्स अस, लेकिन उसके साथ ये है कि इट शुड लीड अस टू डू टू सम बेटर थिंग्स, दैट इज़ व्हाट शी सेज. लेकिन हिंदुस्तान अभी बिल्कुल फ्रैक्चर्ड सेंसिबिलिटीज़ की जगह है. हम एक कोई स्पेस शेयर नहीं करते हैं जहाँ एक दूसरे की सेंसिबिलिटी को शेयर कर सके. इसलिए ये जो रिमाइंडर है कि हमें यह काम करना था जिसमें यह कॉमन स्पेस बन सके, where we share each other's pains and agonies and try to extend our hands to the other. I think that there we have failed as a society. We have not done much. Politics we can always complain against, but as a society we have not done much. Universities, media, other spaces, हम बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं कर पाए हैं और इसको कैसे किया जाए इसी चीज़ पर विचार करने की ज़रूरत है. शुक्रिया.
Thank you very much, all of you. I mean, we've just got extended because just carried away by time. But I would request you now to, I mean, at least we must be, if we have to fight, we have to be optimistic of the future. And we have to, I would request all of you to join us in lighting candles at the Gandhi-King Memorial Plaza. And, so that the flame within us is reflected in that. Very touching that what Humra said. I mean, I'm very shaken by, but that is what the voice is, And but we have to, I think, keep our faith in ourselves and keep our faith in the Constitution and the values that Gandhi and Martin Luther King laid their lives for. We must keep the flame on. Thank you very much. So if you can just join us in lighting candles at the Gandhi.
हम होंगे कामयाब, हम होंगे कामयाब, हम होंगे कामयाब एक दिन. ओ मन में है विश्वास, पूरा है विश्वास, हम होंगे कामयाब एक दिन. होगी शांति चारों ओर, होगी शांति चारों ओर, होगी शांति चारों ओर एक दिन. ओ मन में है विश्वास, पूरा है विश्वास, हम होंगे कामयाब एक दिन. हम चलेंगे साथ साथ, हम चलेंगे साथ साथ, डाले हाथों में हाथ, डाले हाथों में हाथ, हम चलेंगे साथ साथ एक दिन.